Oh, very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're in the home stretch here. If you want to just take our seats, we'll kick off session 7. If I can just start off by reminding anyone who's here to fill in an evaluation form. Sorry to keep banging on about it, but we've only had a few, and it's quite important to us. So you would have had them in your delegate pack. I think there should also be some on the table. So just take a minute if you can, fill that in. Drop it at the reg desk or leave it on the table. We'll pick it up. We really do appreciate the feedback. As Louis said, this is a young event in kind of our constellation, so it's really important that we get this feedback from you. Right, this session is titled "Don't Just Think, Think Differently: Changing the Mindset on Network Management." Maybe we've taken it as a given that people in logistics actually think, but leaving that aside, I think one of the things you've heard over the last 2 days, I think we've heard as much about culture within a company, about processes, about what we can instill across organizations and get people to work together and think differently. As much about that as any kind of specific piece of technology. Not that there aren't some amazing technology out there which are transforming for sure many aspects of the car and by its nature, the production and distribution. But it's really in many ways about instilling a culture of innovation and adaptability and change. So I think that's part of what this session will also look at. We're going to also have some again, wider perspectives from other industries, other views. So we're not just in the automotive supply chain bubble, so to say. I'll introduce our panel. I'm pleased that we could be joined by Deepinder Singh, who's the Chief Executive Officer of 75F. You may not have heard of it. I won't tell his story for him, but it's a HVAC company, not an automotive, for buildings. And Deep has he'll be able to share kind of a very good example, I think, of how an innovation could really transform a company, a sector. And I think, although it's not directly in the automotive supply chain, I think the lessons that you'll take from that should be pretty profound. Very happy to welcome back to the stage, after cutting another rug last night, Bill Wappler, President and CEO of Surgere, who will be again talking more about innovation, about the technology, and again, I think about the culture. And Dana McBrien, Associate Chief Advisor for Logistics in Honda North America. Maybe in some ways, Dana will perhaps ground the panel in some sense, at least by we have a car maker on stage who perhaps will be able to sort of say, yes, no, maybe, good. We'll find, we're trying to kind of complete the cycle there. And again, this should be interactive. We'll have presentations from Deep and from Bill, some comments from Dana, and then let's engage and get you guys involved as much as possible. So, Deepinder, the stage is yours.
Thank you. I will go grab this clicker. Thanks, folks. Thanks for having me here. So let me start with an audience show of hands. How many of you have ever been too hot or too cold in your houses or in your offices? Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so my journey really starts with your raised hands. When my daughter was 1, we moved into a house and we put her into her own bedroom. And what would end up happening is she would wake up in the middle of the night crying. And I was trying to figure out what the heck was going on, and I found that the temperature in her room was dropping about 10 degrees at night. We live in Minnesota. I call it sunny Minnesota, but it's actually quite cold in the winters. Right, so what was happening is that the thermostat was in the master bedroom, and so it would, in the later part of the day, the sun would come in through the windows on the west side, and it would heat up that room, right? So the master bedroom was nice and comfortable, but her room, which was adjoining, was on the east side, so it would be pretty damn cold. So she would wake up in the middle of the night crying. As I said, at that point, I had a company called Leonid Systems, and if any of you are from here, you use Verizon, there's a 95% chance it goes over a network that I did, right? So I'm not at all, my background is not at all from HVAC or anything like that. So I actually had the world's first terabit router sitting in my garage for 5 years. It's also the world's most expensive garage heater. So when I returned that back, we actually had to put in a garage heater in a garage. But back to my daughter's story, I was trying to find out what was going on, and I said, the temperature in her room was dropping, and I was like figuring out why the heck nobody's done anything about it, right? So as a self-respecting engineer, I quit my job and started a company to solve the damn problem. So which brings us here. And the real issue is that basically, okay, that there's something called building controls, right? So they are the building blocks of how HVAC control systems or intelligent buildings are done. And since the late 90s, I mean, they've been in existence in a variety of different ways. Some of you might hear PLCs, programmable loop controllers, and so on, right, in your supply chain logistics. But the thing is, they're very, very flexible. But ultimately, these Lego blocks need somebody else to come in and make a bespoke solution. You need this one smart, intelligent person, the controls guy, who comes in and makes a custom solution for each and every application. So every building needs to have this one guy coming in. This is my friend Eric Ries. He's truly a Lego master. But you need this one guy to come in and make a solution. The problem with that is it adds a lot of cost to the product, to the actual delivered solution, right? So basically, the install cost, about 80% of the cost is in between the channel itself. It's between the distributors and the people who come and install it. The manufacturers, the product is only like 20%, right? So basically, you have a very, very expensive solution, and now you need it. So in a place like this, in this like hotel, you can't do without it. You have to have a building control solution. So you put in the money. But what happens is if you're not in downtown Atlanta, right? 94% of the buildings in the US are not what are called Class A buildings, right? So basically, all of those don't actually, nobody puts in a control solution. So the question that we really had was like, how can we cut down that cost? So we said, you know, we live in the age of the iPhone. Can we actually make it so simple that people who have no knowledge can go in and install your solution? And that's what we really did. Right? So basically, we wanted to make it very, very easy to deploy and put in. So the thing that really helped us over here is what we wanted to do was put a brain in the building without having to have a guy do that. Right? You're trying to eliminate the actual person who's the controls master come in and make that solution. So you can have a smart, intelligent building that saves money, right? Without having to, by cutting away that entire distribution, that entire channel itself. In fact, we are actually doing a project right now with a school where we have 8 and 9-year-olds installing our system, right? So basically, that's how easy we've made it. So I mean, it's not even like, are you smarter than a second grader, right? If you can't install the damn system, well, it's not us this time, right? So this is what was the basis of what we did. So what we did is, we took the temperature data coming in from different parts of the building. So we have these wireless sensors. Right now with IoT, you can have these sensors. And what these do is we feed the data up into the cloud. And when I say cloud, it's really servers in the cloud, right? And we crunch all of this data and create a thermal model of the building. We look at the weather forecast, and we know that's pretty accurate these days, and predict how the building is going to behave. And now once you figure that out, you can have a proactive control system that can send instructions back into the building to figure out how your HVAC system should do, right? So you're always proactive and predictive as opposed to being reactive. I mean, you guys are all from the auto industry. You know this, that if you are in stop-and-go traffic, right? If you have to hit the gas and have to hit the brakes every second, would you get better gas mileage? No, you won't, right? You basically, that's why on a highway, you get far smoother gas mileage. But currently, what ends up happening is all of your control systems are always reactive. It's like driving down a road, but looking in the damn rear view mirror. It makes for a really bumpy ride, right? But if you could actually look down the road and see what traffic is coming down, you could actually be very, very smooth. So you make these very small, subtle adjustments with your steering wheel. So that's really what we really try to do. So basically, the key which is happening is that you have millions of data points which are coming in every day from each building. You make sense of that, and then you crunch it. And we basically call this what we call a building intelligence in a box. So we made it as a, you have this concept of a home theater in a box, right? So you get most of the functionality of a big-ass theater, but you have all these wires that go click, 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 and you're done, right? So basically, that's what we did. We call it building intelligence in a box. So it's out of the box, as I said, 8 and 9-year-olds can install it. So it's relatively easy. Okay. So, but the question is, we didn't want to just stop there. If you think about it, a typical building, you spend about $2 a square foot on the energy in the building, right? The utilities, the electricity for the lights, for the HVAC control system. It's about $20 a square foot for the actual building itself, the rent, the maintenance costs, so on for the building. But the most expensive piece is $200 a square foot for the people inside the building. That's your most valuable asset at any given time. Right? So basically, now if you could touch on the $200 a year number for the people, I mean, that's where you could really make magic happen. And they've done some pretty interesting studies. Like Cornell did some studies in which they actually made people more comfortable. And what they found is that people who were more comfortable had greater retentivity, right? So they didn't want to quit the job as much. They also had a greater willingness to buy. So if you are actually going into retail sector, you want people to buy. I mean, if they're comfortable, they're more likely to buy, right? In fact, when you're working over there on a regular day, what ends up happening is you end up producing a lot of CO2, and that causes like drowsiness, sluggishness, so on, right? Right now, if you're, as an example, feeling sluggish, you may believe that either it's because of the lunch, right? Or that I'm a really poor speaker, but believe me, we're all very scintillating speakers here. Right? So the real culprit here is the CO2, and this is very interesting. So that's why I bring this meter with me. Right? I used to have a quantifiable number that you want over here. In this room, right now, we are barely meeting the spec, the code requirements. In fact, we are not even meeting those. The code requirements say that you have to be 500 parts per million over what's outside. We, right now, are over 1,000 ppm. Right? So if you're feeling sleepy, blame it on the damn CO2. Now you have a scapegoat. Right? In fact, what is interesting is that Harvard did a study in 2015, and what they found over here is that in a standard building, this is what your brain functions like. Okay? When they made the indoor air quality better than a standard building, what we call, there you go, it's buzzing because it's alarming, it's over the limit. So what they found is, I mean, that's true, right? So what they found is that when they enhanced the building even below what the standard recommendations were, people performed cognitive tasks 101% faster end of the day. And these were the same people. So it's not like they substituted the damn rats with faster rats. Right? It's the same people. They kept changing the CO2 levels and the VOCs, and they found that the performance improved. Right? So the next time you want to hire somebody, all you got to do is improve the air quality and kick the guy out next to you. So that's the key. Right? So what ends up happening is, what we wanted to do was make a system which would give you higher comfort and air quality, right? Because that comfort is what is going to drive the human experience. One of the other interesting things is, because of the fact that we have a proactive predictive system, one of the things we were able to do is greatly reduce the size of the equipment. So back to my same example of like going down a highway or having stop and start traffic. If you want stop and start traffic, then you need a big damn engine because you want to accelerate, right? But if you're going down the highway, you don't need that big engine, you just need to go smooth all the time. So that's what we did. So basically, we dramatically reduced the size of the equipment which is required to retrofit, right? So you have a lot of savings in terms of the amount of manpower which is required to put it in and it's cheaper to make. The other thing that what we were able to do is, because of the technology, it's wireless and it's easy to install. This is a true office building, right? What was interesting is they actually had 63 offices. We set it up, and it took 3 contractors 5 hours to what's called commission the building. Basically install our system and make it all. So you can see that all of those offices have temperatures which are within 1 degree of what people wanted them to be. And that is extremely rare, right? Normally, these take weeks to do. There is one room over here, you can see, which is in blue, and that's the temperature is much lower than what it was desired. And that's the vestibule. Because it's actually Minnesota, it was truly below zero that day. Right? So that's when they opened the door. So that's meant as a buffer zone. So that's why the temperature is low. But I mean, this is what was truly possible with those algorithms. Okay. One other interesting aspect is that we did a study with the Gas Technologies Institute is a third-party verification lab. So over 2015, 2016 winter, they did a study with our system. And what they found is the amount of energy that we end up, so it was to validate energy savings. And I'll see if this works, yeah. So basically, on this axis, you have what's called a heating degree day. A heating degree day is how cold a day is. Believe it or not, in Minnesota, it does get cold. So a 30-degree day, a heating degree day means it's 30 degrees below 65. So this is really 35 degrees ambient temperature over the day. And this is the amount of energy which is being used during any given day. So these dots represent the amount of energy which was used. So you'll see on a 30-degree day, typically you end up consuming about 1 million BTUs. Right? So that's what we actually have over here. But this is with the programmable thermostat. What we found is that that's the blue line. What we found is when we actually installed our system, so they did A/B testing. Some days they would have it on a programmable. Some day they would have it in smart mode, as we call it. Right? And what we found is that on a similar day, on a 30-degree day, it was only using 300,000 BTUs. So it's about a 70% reduction in energy just because your system is running better. So we don't expect, these results are somewhat atypical because we expect between 30 and 50% is very common what we end up saving. Okay. So plus we actually have a system that allows people to benchmark across all the sites in the portfolio, so you can actually see which sites are performing better or which are not performing, because that's what you really want. If you have replicable systems, then you can actually figure out there are some trouble spots in some of your locations, then you go and investigate why those are not meeting the benchmark. So that's one thing. And this is an example of what's really happening. You can see that there's free cooling, so it's kind of like, it's a spring day. You'll see that in the morning, some heating was required to bring the building up to temperature. That's those orange things over there. And then this light blue. So what's happening is we're really using the outside air to cool the building. As the sun starts coming up, now the building starts heating up. But you're bringing, it's kind of like opening up the windows. Right? It makes for a pretty simple use case, but I mean, you don't have windows over here. I wish they did, but they don't. So the only way you do it is you bring it through the ducts. Right? So we're using free cooling over here. The humidity is well under control in that case. And also, what I was talking about is the CO2 levels. You can see that basically when the levels start rising, we open up the dampers and you make sure that it's actually comfortable again from an indoor air quality perspective. Right? So your people are comfortable, you're using free cooling, and your CO2 levels are maintained. Right? So the thing is, like, we always think that you want more than just one piece. You want the triple bottom line. Right? You want to address the energy savings, you want to address the health of the building, and finally, you want to address the employee productivity, because, I mean, that's where you really want to move the needle. Right? If this was back in the 70s, I would actually have it going to 11. But right now, it's only going up to 90%. So we say that, I mean, with IoT and cloud computing, one of the key things that we can do is if you think outside the box, then you can really dream big. And I mean, these are exciting times. In our company, we have a logo, motto, and basically that is saving energy never felt better. So, right, so we are in good time. So thankfully, we've been recognized by a few people over here. We actually went and demonstrated at Google. We've been named one of the top 15 startups in the world in IoT space. Right, so it's interesting. Some people are recognizing what we're doing. So, as I said, saving energy never felt better, folks. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's really valuable to see an example of a startup kind of in action and how an idea sort of moves through and some of the technical details there. It's quite a fascinating product, but also, again, the carry through on the idea, and I look forward to some of the Q&A where we might talk through that a little bit. And now if any of you are feeling a little bit sluggish, we now know as the CO2, if the second cause might be Bill Wappler, if any of you joined for the afterglow or the afterglow for last night. But now Bill Wappler from Surgere. Thank you. Yeah. Cheers.
Yep. Good afternoon. How was lunch? I kind of missed that. Was it a pretty good one? So now we got your sugar going like this, and we're about to go like this, right? Thinking about, can I catch my flight? I'm going to take you through a personal journey because you're going along for the ride. As I've looked across the folks in attendance the last couple of days, a lot of you are friends, many of you are already clients, but you know us really from my first job, not the job I'm doing now. And you're going to work with me on the job I'm doing now, and you don't know it yet. So, yeah, let's talk really about the subject of the day. And it's a subject that I find that not many people even recognize, let alone start to prepare, which is why we brought you Electrolux. So you could talk to them about where they are. Their product's different, their life cycle's different, their mode to market is different. There are a lot of differences, but the fact of the matter is they're going in a journey that you're going to be taking as well, and they have some insights for you, so we wanted to introduce you to them. 4.0, or what in the United States we call IIoT, right? And before we get into that, let's listen to our Apple Watch just for a moment and take a breath, right? We've talked about a lot of things in the last couple of days that are very different than our normal day at the job. In my case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave our technology behind, and we're not unique, as you will hopefully spend some time with technology vendors that are here. There are some incredible things happening. So we're not going to talk about really Surgere so much today. What we're going to talk about is how you know us today. Today, our clients that are out here know us on a point-specific basis. In other words, they come to us and they go, gee, Bill, our packaging is terrible, it's chaotic, we're losing a lot of money, we don't know where it is, come fix that. And we do that. Or they go, you know what we really want you to do? Bring one of your robots and put them in our warehouses so that we're doing constant cycle counts all the time. Or we don't know where our finished vehicles are, map it out dynamically, constantly, right? Or now it's not only do I want to know where my trucks are, I want to know the bill of material that's going in them, when it's finished being loaded, where it is, where it gets to the yard, and then I want to know when I'm unloading it, because a lot of times I don't even know that, are the parts in the house yet, right? So like a lot of other technology folks, that's how you get to know us, point-specific solutions. But that's not going to get us where we got to go. We all have to get beyond that because of 4.0. So let's kind of gather all those conversations that we've had. We've talked previously about what the current and future supply chains look like. We've talked about what the definition of 4.0 is, and I'll just spend a moment on that. We've talked about what the difference is in innovation versus incremental improvement. And this is maybe one of the biggest battles that we have as an industry, right? Because what really happens is we have wonderful people doing wonderful work in minute scale. And then some brilliant son of a gun comes along and parks a server next to his Ducati in his garage and has access to powerful technology, great software, wonderful minds, and disrupts an industry almost overnight. And that's what we're all kind of living through, right? So then we look at a little bit about the adversities that we're all facing. We'll talk very briefly again about that, but really it all comes to the final conversation that we should have among all of us before we go home, which is 4.0. So a glimpse of innovation. First of all, we wanted to introduce you to some of the components of innovation. We've talked about that a little bit. I wanted to introduce you to a disruptor and how they think, right? They think by having a young child in a bedroom that is not at the right temperature, and they go out to their server in the garage, and they solve the problem, only now I can tell you Honeywell isn't real happy. Right? So then what we want to do is we want to talk about I.4 and what that really means to how we need to redefine innovation. So what is it? Everybody know what 4.0 is? Who are the Europeans in here? Why? There were BMW folks I see. Hi, yeah. So 4.0 is a European thing, right? You started it. We in the United States believe it's IIoT. That's just not true. It's not about technology. 4.0 started by economists. Yeah, think about that. The theory is, and the vast majority of the people in the world are starting to adopt to the theory, by the way, and that is that there's more people than the financial wherewithal to support them. It's just that simple. We have too many people, too few dollars. So what's happening is that it's changing the very basis of what future business will be. That came out of Europe. Some very, very good people in a lot of sectors are still working on the concept, but we're in movement, folks. This is happening right now. 4.0, if you look at what it represents, is a movement from the physical manufacturing to cyber-physical, right? And here's where we should all be alarmed. For me, this just blows my mind. And we do a lot of work in a lot of different fields, right? Aeronautics, aerospace, military, all that kind of stuff. What got me is that the folks at Boeing are projecting that 4.0 and the introduction of 3D printing, robotics, all the things that we've been talking about recently, look at what it's going to do to them. 40% increase in productivity, 40% output increase, 40% increase in growth. That's phenomenal. We all work so hard for little bits and pieces of optimization, whether it's cost control, cost reduction, better use of people, whatever it might be. But think about when we go home, we work on such little pieces, and this is coming at us, and it's coming at us really, really fast. The biggest change that will affect all of us is because of the economics that are driving this model suggest the factories are coming back home. Think about that. We're in supply chain business. So someone now is virtually telling you, and this is becoming more true every day, that the way that we've built our businesses won't work in the future. It's changing. It's coming back home. It's going to be very small campuses that are going to be near their client base, and they're going to produce small numbers of bits and pieces. Whether it's car parts, airline engines, doesn't matter. It's happening, and it's happening today, and it's going to disrupt our business beyond what we can even imagine. So, why should we believe in 4.0? Why should we pay attention to what's happening with the disruptors, right? One of our past clients was a Kodak company. I could fly anywhere in the world, I'd always see Kodak somewhere, right? All of you folks that have been traveling international, you've seen that red K and that yellow background everywhere you've gone. You see it anymore? No. And I'd go to the meetings at Kodak, and they would say, we are the most innovative. We've got new processes for film processing. We've got new cameras coming out. We are really great at what we do, right? Then our friend came along, a disruptor, right? Oh, sorry, Louis. A disruptor came along, and not only did it remove a major company out of the industry, it changed the entire filmmaking or photography business, did it not? So what's the other thing that's pushing us? The other thing that's pushing us is Wall Street. Well, what is Wall Street telling us? Wall Street's telling us that they value innovation. They don't value manufacturing anymore, right? Look at the numbers, they're crazy. Now, you and I may sit here and go, well, first of all, is it real value or not? We could have all those kind of conversations, and I'm really more on the side that it's not real value. But what it's saying is that they believe more in the future of innovation than they believe in good old manufacturing. So we're being told by Wall Street that we have to change. We have to. So there's another piece, that we need to pay attention to. And I don't see a lot of folks that were with us in Mexico. We talked very briefly about this in Mexico. And that is that 3 days in our nation's history changed our entire history, perhaps world history, right? And it changed at the Battle of Gettysburg. And if you remember when we talked about that, what really happened was the South, if you remember your history, was winning everything, right? They had morale, they had everything going for them, they had the best generals, everything was working great. And then they decided to take the fight north because they wanted to go to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, they wanted to take over an armory, and if doing that, they hoped to break the morale of the North and there would be an expedited end to the war. And then the truth hit them. But the truth was really built on the fact they had no information. Robert E. Lee would have never gone into that battle except it was blind. Remember, his cavalry was gone. He had no idea what he was facing. If he did, he wouldn't have been there. He'd go away for another day. Second thing is, with the blind maneuvering that was going on, right? Now he's positioning himself incorrectly to everybody else. He's making strategic moves just like we do every day. And he's making it without information. Look at how we model what we do. We model what we do on a daily basis by assumptive technology. Not nearly enough real data. And look at what it cost Lee. And then he had, of course, blind hubris. He's going, hey, look, we always won before, we'll win again. Right? And he didn't. Now, in the military, what we do is we call that the fog of war, right? Fog of war basically means once it starts, if you don't have the information, you lose. And it's true for us too. So when we talk about 4.0, we're talking about much of the same types of problems, if you will, and maybe the same catastrophic impact to our companies. If we don't have the information, if we continue on assumptive modeling, if we so believe in ourselves that we believe we can win it no matter what, and we send Pickett up to fight with some Yankees and they got to run a mile to do it, then we know what's going to happen, right? But sometimes we feel like that. What's going on in Mexico? What the heck? What about weather? You know, I had a client in here, I would embarrass them for a moment, but they had folks in logistics sleeping in the offices because there were storms going across the United States. They had no idea what was going on. And they're always making calls. What's 3PL say? Well, the driver's busy. We don't know where he's at, right? We all are trying to move without information, and 4.0 won't let us do that. We have transitions going on, modality changes. We are, some of us, initializing 4.0. We've got a demand for asset management improvements and velocity improvements. All of that's happening to us. And one thing we don't want to do is this. Remember the dot-com era? Companies like yours spent hundreds of millions of dollars in the belief that they should be part of the dot-com boom, right? And we know what happened. So what's happening? In my conversation with my clients, is they ask me to come in now, my new job is to give executive presentations on what's happening, because my first job was all about sensor-based sciences. We know a lot about sensors. We know a lot about that science. So what we know of each other is Bill, I got to track this stuff. You got to tell me where it is. Whether it's a military helicopter in Somalia or whatever it is, we need to know where everything is, right? Well, now what's happening is because everyone is kind of looking at the future a bit, the new job that I have is much like this, only in executive boardrooms going, here's what's coming. And they're depending on how they feel that day, I'm either the canary in the mine and I've stopped singing because they know they're in deep trouble, right? Or maybe I'm looking in a crystal ball and helping them go somewhere. So it depends on how the day's going for them because they can both be the same thing at the same time. But we'll just talk about challenges one moment, and then I'm going to give you the path on how to get here that you will all take whether you want to or not. So first of all, let's talk about the challenges that the automotive industry primarily has. There's a real challenge with making a mature organization full of people that have servers in their garage next to their Ducati. We're not built like that, right? The speed of innovation cycle, if you look at our business, it goes like this, right? We're bringing out products rapidly. Science is changing on how they use it. All that stuff's happening so quickly. But look at the industry that we belong to, right? The automotive industry moves a little bit more like this. So it gives the opportunity in the way that we all look at the world, disruptors move like this. What do you do about that, right? It's a challenge. The innovation culture, I had someone sitting at our table the other day that said, we choose not to be innovative, we want to be a fast follower. You're going to meet one of those guys if you are. Innovation investment. The gentleman, Rusty, from Electrolux had to fly home. He's not here. Here's something that they have done that most of our clients haven't yet, and that is the board of directors, the CEO got together and they've pooled an amount of cash for innovation that's leading to 4.0. Has your board of directors done that? They've set aside like $500 million to get started or something like that. There are not a lot of companies that have done that, and that'll be a problem because where's the money come from? And you're going to fail a lot on the way. And there's a whole leadership and change management issue. So we have some challenges, but I'll tell you how you're going to get there. Here are the requirements. First, and this again, we happen to be here because we're in the sensor business. We track stuff everywhere, right? So the first thing that we see our clients going through is you have to map all of the incidental movement stops and everything else within your supply chain. You'd be surprised how few of our clients have done that. I mean, literally map it so that you can sit down and go, this point in time and this point in my supply chain, that's where I'm putting sensors. That's where I'm collecting data. I need to take a tactical advantage of that point in the supply chain. Well, you won't know to do that if you're not going through this exercise. Second thing you will do is locate and define areas of sensitivity within that supply chain. And again, it's going to happen, so you might want to kind of start getting some of your analysts on that. Because here's why. You will be deploying sensor technologies because it's the basis of 4.0. Truly, if you look at everything that you're going to read about it, 4.0 is based on sensor technologies. I want to know, and it started in the factory, but it's going to affect you maybe even more than them. So in the factory, I want to know what's the heat signature or the vibration signature of all of my motors in the factory so that it can call for service before it happens. And I want to know what my throughput is. I want to know lots and lots of stuff within the factory. Well, the same thing is coming outside. You're going to have to put sensor technology everywhere you go because you won't be fast enough without it. You won't have enough data that we talked about without it. The fourth thing is you're going to capture and then analyze what we'll call localized data, right? What's that data telling us? We staying too long at this door? We packing quickly enough? Are we filling our trucks? Are we optimizing each piece of the areas of sensitivity? So you're going to start looking at local data, and that's a great thing because there's not enough statisticians to go around to solve all of our problems, and big data isn't understood yet, and Watson's not fully up to speed. We have some work to do before we start playing with big data, right? But you have to get ready for it, because what's going to happen is you're going to start combining localized data into enterprise visibility. Lastly, you'll apply deep learning. We're working with some folks at MIT and Pitt and Auburn on some of this at the moment, because as it all feeds up, the problem with data is there's a picture there. Have you all seen Seurat's painting where it's a lot of folks in a park at a picnic, but you get close and it's lots of little dots, right? They're data points. Without the science of data interpretation, we don't see the picture yet. So big data has a long way to go, right? We have to collect it. We got to make sure we have the right colors. We have to look at it differently. It'll take some scientists a while for us to be able to do that, but you're going to have to be able to fill it. So here's a couple of pointers that I'll give you. What we're finding is that you have to have a strategy, but you have to be tactical while you're being strategic. You have to be. Because you have to succeed, you have to save some money along the way. You have to have project ROI and momentum, or you won't ever deploy strategy. It just isn't going to happen. No one in this room is going to pay anybody millions and millions of dollars for a strategy that you can't tactically deploy along the way. It doesn't happen. So as you're building your 4.0 strategy, think in terms of tactics as well, please. So that's as fast as I can go through what normally takes me a bit more time. Thank you for joining us. Go innovate. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. Thank you, Bill. Again, an inspiring presentation there. Again, addressing the things that go into Industry 4.0 and the IoT, but more importantly, again, the way we need to think, the way we need to change the way we approach some of these changes is not necessarily about the technology, or at least not the technology alone. And as I learned in Mexico, at least for the Yankees in the room here, thank God there was no RFID back during the Civil War, right? Because who knows where we would be. Well, I shouldn't say that to a rebel audience either, maybe. Our next speaker, Dana McBrien from Honda. I think you want to make some opening comments, perhaps some reflection. Do you want to do it here or wherever you prefer?
Well, I was going to get up and come up there and talk, but now that Deepinder's told me that I'm tired and why, I'll just stay here and just make a few comments.
Yeah, that's great.
So my role here, Christopher kind of let in and said I'm going to try to tie things together. Really, my role here is to dispute everything that they said. Everything's fine. There's nothing wrong. There's no reason for innovation. Go back to your jobs. Okay, now my credibility's blown. No, just a couple things, and I really what I want to try to tie together is, and the way I say this might downplay what Deepinder explained that he did, but if you think about it, Deepinder's condition, he saw a problem, he put together a solution, and he deployed it. Pretty easy, because the only person he had to really respond to or had to answer to was himself. And that's really the difference. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm downplaying that, because he also took all the risk. All the risk and all the reward led right through one party. In our environment, the tough part is you're responding to a board of directors, you're responding to a manager, you're pitching an idea. If you think about it, I don't think there's anybody in this room, if you're working in logistics, that you're not constantly innovating or constantly sharpening the saw. The difference is you might have a great idea with a great payback that doesn't have an assured payback, that there are people in the organization that won't want to take the risk. And you also can't answer for it yourself. You might once, but you'll probably be on the job hunt. So that, I think that's the important thing to remember as we deploy innovation or pitch innovation. The real tough part is you're the salesperson. You're not necessarily the decision maker, but that's our condition. So being in the logistics industry or logistics field, supply chain field, can everybody show me with the show of hands? You don't have to use the cards. Who considers themselves a change agent in their organization? So if I ask that question just slightly different, if we asked your boss, who would say that you are a change agent in their organization? Show of hands. Okay, one more twist. If we asked your coworkers and your peers, are you a pain in the butt and constantly changing everything that they do, who would say that they get that response? There's the true change agents. So you're actually, Bill mentioned that Deepinder is a disruptor in the industry. You can be considered a disruptor within your company. So there's a level of risk, there's a level of pushback that you're always going to see. I was thinking about this the other day. The definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and hoping you get a different result. Well, I would define futility as doing the same thing over as things change around you and hope it's okay. And I think that's a lot of how we have to react to things if you don't innovate. There's really two paths you can take in innovation. And in Deepinder's case, there was no legacy condition. You were constructing right from the ground up. In our environment, we always go through that analysis. Do I change what I've got? Do I modify what I have to try to match my issue? Or do I start all over? Start all over is generally the most expensive, right?
Right.
So that's the toughest path to take, but that goes back to that definition of futility. If you keep deploying the same tools with a different coat of lipstick on it, little different functionality, and hope that it matches where you're going. But when you're talking about doing a complete change, in many instances, you're talking about new technology. You're talking about something that is completely foreign to your organization. And there's that higher level of risk and reward. And if you think about projects that you have proposed, probably the majority of them were let's try to modify what we've got. It's comfortable. It's worked for years and years and years. It's easier to deploy. It's faster to deploy. We'll get the payback. But even sometimes that's difficult to make in a sales pitch. The other thing that you have to consider in an organization where you're doing the sales pitch is this new technology? Am I the one that wants to grab the machete and cut the path? Or am I going to be, what was the term you used? A fast follower?
Fast follower, yes.
Or in some instances, am I going to wait till everybody else deploys it and nobody else is falling down, so I'm okay? Yeah, that's the easiest course of action to take. The problem is it's also the slowest, and by the time you deploy it, the next generation and next generation is already out there, and you're still behind. You still haven't necessarily addressed your true conditions. We've got a lot of changes in the logistics industry. There are things that attack us every day from the outside, let alone the things that we deal with from the inside. Where we source parts, we're seeing our sourcing model move farther and farther away. As we add features to the car, we no longer have suppliers relocating near us. It's you want my product, you come and get it. Mm-hmm. We have new technology going in the car. We've got the electrification of our vehicles. There are a lot of outside influences, regulatory items, that really are constantly attacking us. So the importance of innovation has never been more, it's never been more important. And the importance of doing it quickly and trying to keep up is extremely important. Yesterday there was some discussion about collaboration, and if it seems like I'm jumping all over, it's because I'm ADHD. So try to follow along. But yesterday there was some discussion about collaboration, and the reason I bring up the collaboration is in a lot of instances you can use collaboration with your LSP, your LLP providers, your other service providers. That collaboration can bring their products, their techniques, their proven track record to play, and you can do it faster. So collaboration with your service providers is very important. But even this morning, listening to the discussion about aftermarket or service parts, a lot of collaboration going on between competitors, and we're seeing more and more of that. We're launching some collaboration. I won't mention with who, but some collaboration with some other OEMs in logistics. We're still kind of I guess on a small scale at this point, but we are continuing to move those things forward. Very important to battle all of those outside influences and the fact that we're in a lot of cases losing capacity in the logistics industry. I want to go back to, first I want to give a little anecdote, and the reason I'm bringing this up, it's not, please don't take this as bragging, but it was a point in my life that stuck with me, and it's about initiative and redirecting initiative. We used to play a lot of softball. I think probably the most softball games I played in 1 year. A major league schedule is 162 games. We played in 1 year 168 games in a condensed period shorter than what the Major League Baseball players play. So you can imagine I spent a lot of time on the diamonds. But our Honda team played every year in the Nationals for an extended period of time. And we were playing in Tupelo, Mississippi, about 300 yards from the birthplace of Elvis, if you're into trivia. And the reason this sticks with me about initiative and redirecting initiative is I was our cleanup hitter, and we were behind in the game, and I was so determined that I was going to put us ahead. I swung so hard at a ball that I fouled it back to the backstop. This is slow pitch. So if anybody's played slow pitch, you know that's really not very easy to do. You got to miss it really bad. So I could have hung my head, and we were playing a team from Texas, and there were some very vocal fans from the other team, and they were harassing me pretty good. So I stepped back in the batter's box, redirected my anger, my focus, my attention, and the next ball went over the trees outside of the fence, and it was still on the rise when it went over the fence. And dead silence. But the reason I bring that up, there was a comment made yesterday by Mel Kirk of Ryder about encouraging people to take a swing. And that's the linkage that I'm trying to make here. As we have people in our organizations who are willing to step up and try things, we've got to be the leaders for those folks to say, you know what, if you miss, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. So get right back in there and take a big cut. those are going to be the innovators in your organization. Those are going to be the disruptors to that outside noise for your organization. So really important as leaders in development of our future leaders to encourage them to get right back in the box and take a big cut. I think the only other thing that I wanted to cover is, actually, I think that was the last thing I wanted to cover. But I wanted to try to tie together the innovators external to our organizations and somebody that's in the organization who are the innovators. Inside of Honda, we finally got the recognition that change is coming at us so rapidly that we're probably at that fish or cut bait juncture, and it's time to redeploy, time to, in some cases, modify what we're doing, but in a lot of cases, it's time to look at new methodologies, new techniques, new products, and really go after it wholesale. So hopefully I've kind of linked things together between the disruptors and the disrupted.
Well, if anything, Dana, you made one thing very clear. This is a room full of a pain in the ass. No. No, I think it's a very important to sort of make that distinction, obviously, and the realistic message of working inside a big corporation with many departments, collaborations within, bosses, change of command, so to speak, and pushing change from inside is different to doing it from outside. And that's a realistic assessment of what I'm sure many people in the room see and maybe are frustrated with, whether they're on the inside of their organization or trying to innovate from the outside too. So thank you. I think those points are all very relevant. Thanks to all of our panelists for that, for those presentations and discussion. Let's open it up to the audience. You may have your own comments or experiences to share. But in the meantime, as you think of them, I will just want to start it off with Deep. I mean, Dana said, I mean, that obviously, because you started your company in a way, you were the driving force behind it. Of course, it's more complicated, as we know. I mean, you have to, convince someone for funding, and you have to get through to suppliers and building companies to do that. Can you talk about where you faced the most resistance since, okay, you decided to do it, but where did you struggle to convince, whether it's construction firms or whatever, to pay attention to this and to really sort of, believe in what you were sort of doing?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think part of the onus of being a disruptor is that you kind of, if you have the laser pointing at you, that's a good sign, right? Like in our case, one of the things I originally thought that we would actually have people from within the industry come over and we would make this great product and they would adopt it, and essentially speaking, they would start, it's easier to put in, so everyone would start using it, right? The problem is that these people over here, if you look at these folks, right, and I'll go back one more slide.
We do that in the back.
Yeah. So this is the early days of the computer revolution, right? So this is interesting. This is 1970s. It was assumed back then that everybody would buy their own computer kit. They would then solder the damn thing, right? They would learn a programming language and solve their own problems, right? Fast forward 40 years later, and I mean, you walk into the Apple store, if it takes you more than 3 minutes to buy the thing and be productive, you're out of there. Right, you'll go to the Samsung store next doors. So if you come back, the next slide, please, this is exactly where building automation is right now. It looks exactly the same. These are those control guys that I was talking about. What I hadn't realized is that these people make a freaking living out of it, right? They take 80% of that money is going to them. Right, so if you actually go over to them and say that I'm going to make your job easier, that's not how they make their money. They don't make the money from the 20% product that they sell. They make the money from selling their hours. Right? So basically, none of those people in the supply, in the traditional channel, like us at all, period. We don't speak their language. They don't house their product. We just got completely shut out. We spent a year and a half trying to go through them, and it was a total waste of until we came to this realization that, I mean, they're just not going to go for it, right? So essentially speaking, we speak the end language of the people the end customer, that's where people like consumers like Apple and stuff have innovated, right? Or Tesla's doing it right now. They speak a great language to the consumer. They don't speak the language of the industry itself. And that's, I think, one of the hallmarks of being a disruptor is that, truly speaking, if you're an outcast, that's probably a good thing, which is why I'm welcome here, but probably not in the HVAC shows.
We're the only ones that would have you, huh? I'm not sure how happy the Grand Hyatt will be either, and they see that reading that you that you gave. Maybe you should talk to them actually afterwards.
Sure.
Well, thank you for that. Any questions, comments from the audience? Moving towards the latter stage of the conference. So again, it's all that CO2 that's pumped into the air here.
Yeah.
When we, I mentioned this, yes. Oh, sorry, the young man in the middle there.
I can't help it. It's Lynn Failing with Kimmel. Picking up on your Honda story, what I'm interested in is what you didn't tell me behind the scenes of how the disruptors inside Honda, I assume, created some sort of pressure for some sort of top-down leadership which embraced the disruptors in some sort of political innovation process. Tell us all how it happened at Honda.
Well, I'm going to repeat a little bit of what was said yesterday about a disruptor isn't necessarily a person. It can be an activity or an action. In the case of having a fragmented organization or a fragmented supply chain, and everybody's out to get their we call them green circles. I want my green dot. I did it okay. But doing the development of those processes independently, sometimes you're the one that gets left holding the bag. So somebody brings innovation into their process, but they disrupt 5 other processes. And that's more the internal disruption. That can be how we determine we're going to manufacture cars. That can be how we determine we're going to establish our space management and our materials management. Those kind of things can directly impact our transportation teams. And looking at them independently, we inadvertently become disruptors to each other. So it's a lot of that pushback. Everybody thinks we're doing a good job. We're all doing innovation. We're just not doing it in concert.
Can I follow up with Surgere? In terms of some of your clients, you have witnessed and been a part of that transformation process within some of your clients. What have been the key points in terms of filtering up and filtering down that have made that a successful disruption outcome?
We've been very fortunate in that we've actually been asked to sit on some of the digital transformation teams within some of the companies that we deal with, like Electrolux and some of the others. And we found that there is a playbook for internal innovation for large, if you will, mature industry. And a lot of that starts with knowing that your folks don't know how to innovate, right? Whoever sent their folks to innovation training? We send them to black belt training, but no one in our industry sends anybody to innovation training. And they also, the other thing that we started to see happening, beyond the fact that organizations were self-training so that folks could be guided by knowledge and not just, trying. What we also saw was that leadership had to have the audacity to fail. And I can't ever underscore that enough, because folks in mature industry typically know that failure means that it's career limiting, it's career ending, it's lots of different things, but it's not good. And so if you really want to spur on innovation, then you have to be able to go to people and say, we have cash, go try it because we know you're going to fail a lot. Don't worry about it, you're safe. This is a safe harbor environment, right? and we're going to show you how to do it. And you get that soup cooking, and it's incredible what people will come up with. And the millennials that we were talking about earlier, they don't know how to look at what we do, but it's incredible what they bring with them and how they impact that dialogue. So you have to also then, the last piece that we see is that you've got to bring in a lot of different minds with a lot of different perspective so that you don't innovate yourself to doing it the way you always did, right? That's typically what we're seeing out there.
Oh, well, I'll take a question right here. And I think 2 at the table there.
So first of all, thank you, because I think this is excellent. I'm Catherine Hayes. I'm the director of the South Carolina Automotive Council, and I work with primarily OEMs, Tier 1s and Tier 2s. But one of the things that we're doing, I would say relatively new, is we're bringing in international and national startups to Clemson University's International Center for Automotive Research. And at the Automotive Summit, we have this thing we call Ingenious SC, and we recognize that it's limited right now, and we want to expand that. But of course, the startup wants money, and they want connections to the Hondas and the BMWs and the GMs and we haven't, we recognize the value in bringing the new technology and the new ideas and the new innovation in for our manufacturers, but we haven't figured out yet the model to marry them. And how do we facilitate that transaction to support our manufacturers when a lot of the main decisions are made at the mothership and not necessarily at the plant. But we know the plant they need the spark, they need the idea, they need the process technology, they need whatever. So Deepinder, how would you want that to happen? And maybe, Bill and Dana, how can you see it actually working? How can they marry, and how can folks like me be a facilitator for that?
Right. I'll tell you, that's an excellent question. I'll tell you my perspective. I've always worked in startups. This is the 6th startup that I've been a part of. Right, so this is the first one that I'm the CEO of. I call myself the reluctant CEO, but I'm the technology guy in general. So one of the things I've always held is that when you're a startup, it's like, and you're working with a big company, it's like if you're a mouse dancing with a pink elephant, right? You could be, the elephants could be having a damn good time, but they step over the mouse and they don't even realize it, right? Whereas there's not much left of the mouse if the elephant steps on them. So one of them is that you have to be very matched in terms of, are they agile enough? So if you're a startup, I always caution working with a really big company to begin with. You want to start with a company which is more fitting your size. It always seems very attractive to work with a Honda day one. But I mean, they will frickin' eat you out, right? And they don't even notice. So I always caution folks against doing that. You first want to figure out your market space and truly figure out if the disruption is working before you want to scale it up. So that's just my perspective of what I would caution startup folks to do. Right. I don't know what you've seen.
Well, those that remember the beginning of our company, we started our kitchen table, and I can remember when I told my wife we were going to spend all of our savings that were supposed to go to retirement while I was simultaneously getting 2 mortgages on our house. So I've kind of been there, done that, right? And Dana and I actually argued a little bit about this at Global one time, because Dana's question was, how are the OEMs embracing this? And I'll never forget that, because basically what I said was, and in some cases it still holds, what really happens, and we had this discussion at our table just yesterday, what happens is, as an innovator, that's our job, is to take great technology and form fit it to bring a good solution, right? Here's what we find in a traditional model. We walk in the door, we have a great idea, we do a lot of studying, we do a lot of analytics, we figure out exactly the right thing to do. It could be several technologies. They were mentioned earlier, RFID, GPS, near field communication. You get them all to fit, you're ready to go, and then what happens? Then there's an SOW that comes out and an RFQ, and all of that work and your ability to be special is generalized out to the industry. So it removes then the relationship of being innovative together. Now I will say that was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
He's a lot bigger than I was, so that I didn't really argue with him. I said, yes, sir. But I will say this, I think that the urgency of change is really taking place in the automotive industry. We have one very large client that literally built a war room with us, opened the door and said, we trust you're going to get to the right solution. We're going to give you some team members. And when you come out of that door, then we're going to go deploy it together. So that's an entirely different cycle and model of doing business, and it breaks a lot of the old models down, and it's happening. So I think that the enterprises are looking forward to figuring out how to bring a guy from his garage inside and have that interpreted back into their organization. So it's starting to open up a little bit, but as an entrepreneur, we're always wondering what the risk is.
Right.
You know, we're always trying to figure out through patents and all that stuff, how do we build walls around what we do that he can't take an SOW to market. And that breaks down that whole innovation thing. You stay arm's length. So one of the things that I might suggest when you go home is to sit with your purchasing organizations and perhaps figure out a way to, I don't know, whether you call it reconditioning your SOW process, the terms and conditions that you argue about in contracts, it would be a great place to start.
So just to add a little bit to that, we had a conversation yesterday about innovation and are there very many startup companies? Are there, well, actually what I shared was I met with a smaller company, I think it's been probably 2 or 3 months ago, who came to Honda and said, hey, we'd like to see if there's anything that we can do for you. And finally, his comment to me was, I'll be quite frank with you, you guys scare me to death. Because there was a new startup company, it was relatively small, but from the standpoint of a service provider, that's not a bad thing to go into the relationship with, that thought process. You guys do scare me because you're large, but from the OEM side, you've also got to be cognizant that there may be something that party can do for you. And it becomes a mutual partnership. And at Honda, we always talk about trying to establish partnerships. We're not looking for service providers, we're looking for business partners. And that's a pretty healthy relationship if you can get that kind of give and take with one party saying, I don't know if I can really do this for you, and the other party almost encouraging them to say, yeah, you probably can, but we're not going to let you bite off more than you can chew.
Right.
Your other question about facilitation, I think the best thing from a facilitation standpoint in the position that you're in is you're talking to both parties, right? So the listening skills really have to kick in. And understanding that the customer side of the business that I'm speaking with, I'm starting to understand this is what their needs are, and position the product or the service or the whatever the offering is from the new party. Is there a match? You know, not necessarily to try to force fit it, but to introduce the right parties together when the timing's right.
One other thing I want to add is that we've had some success structuring before the engagement what an outcome is going to be like, right? So you figure out your happy case and say that if we deliver this, this is what we're expecting, right? So you know what the end result is, and you figure out the metrics which need to be hit so that it's relatively clear. One of the key things I think which scares startups, me specifically, is the lack of transparency, right? You work with a big OEM or a big incumbent, and I mean, they could have 50 people talking to 2 of you, right? And all of a sudden, there's lots of voices over there, so you never really know what that final authority is or what's really going to happen out of that. So if you actually begin with that, if we meet these metrics, is it fair to say that we will engage on a limited deployment or scale it? And remember, it has to be in steps, right? It should never be that will we get all of your supply chain if we do this one little pilot and show that our technology works as a proof of concept. So you put in a staggered schedule, and this is what we think is realistic. If both parties agree, I think it's fair. I think it's also something as a startup you can take back to whoever is funding you, right? Because if you can show that you have this agreement with a big strategic and these are very clear defined goals, even if you're slipping, you can go back and ask your funders, I think this is a very valuable thing to continue with this engagement, and we need this money.
And if I may, I'll add one comment to that. First of all, my wife would not have been happy with that either. But we only get so much money, Bill. But Catherine, I think that one of the things that we all hope for when we go home is what do we do tomorrow? We all spend a lot of time here. We've spent a lot of money. We've come here. We have an expectation of change. And I always think, well, that's really what the dialogue should be. The dialogue is, where are we today? Where do we need to go tomorrow? And what do we do about it? What do we do tomorrow? And if you believe in the theories that we've been talking about now for a couple of days, and you kind of recognize that development cycle, right? Mature industry develops like this. Deep develops like this. So the theory of how you get to 4.0, doesn't it not only encourage that you have to figure out ways to bring outside influencing innovation inside, right? Or you won't even get there unless you buy it, right? You could go buy Hughes, you could go buy EDS, you could go buy Lyft, or whomever it might be, and purchase innovation. But I think we all know in our industry, we really suck at that, right? We buy it and then spin it off after we've kind of drained it of its blood. So one of the things that we might want to consider when we get home is, how do we build an organization that will embrace outside innovators and then help make that change happen? It's not an easy thing to do, right? Your organization isn't prepared for it. You don't really know how to do it. All of that's happening, but it's a critical skill that I think we all need to have.
Thank you. Also very important points there about alignment, how you communicate in organizations, from smaller ones to larger ones. I don't know, I wouldn't be so afraid of Dana, except if he brought his baseball bat, because it sounds like he's got a pretty mean swing. So. I think we're actually, I know there was a few other questions, but we're running kind of short on time, and we want to try and finish because we're going to start our next session a bit earlier, as we said, at 3:45. I'm also told there's ice cream outside now, so we don't want to let that melt and stuff, so we can move from the innovation to the ice cream. But I think this was a great discussion. I think it challenged the way we think a little bit here, and it's very important dialogue to have. Thanks very much to Deep for coming and sharing your story with this industry. I think that you'll find people who are quite interested and receptive to that. And let's give them a last round of applause.
Thanks, Steve. Nice job.
Thank you.
And thank you.
If I can also just remind you guys again about the evaluation forms, please take a moment to fill them in and hand them in to us at the registration. Thank you.